ready for your weekly dose of pixie dust with Disney Coast to Coast.
Hey folks, and welcome to Disney Coast to Coast, the ultimate unofficial Disney fan podcast. I'm Jeff DePauli.
And I'm Patrick Dougal.
And I'm not going to waste any time here. Let's just jump right back into the second part of our interview with producer Don Hahn, who has done so many projects. We're going to talk all about it with him. If you haven't seen last week's episode, which was part one, go to DisneyCoastToCoast.com and check that out first. And here's part two.
I grew up in Southern California. I was born in Chicago. But yeah, my first job, I was 20 years old. I was going to Cal State Northridge. We couldn't afford Cal Arts, as many people can't. But Northridge had a great program in music, and I was a music major there. I got a summer job at Disney, working in the morgue, which was in the basement of the Ink and Paint building, and that's where all the old animation was stored. And my job was really delivering scenes. So somebody would need a scene in their room for reference, and I could pull it off the shelf, scene from Jungle Book, scene from Pinocchio, take it up to their room and sign it out to them. But I would be delivering it to Ken Anderson or to Milt Kahl or to somebody. So I could stay for 30 seconds and say, hey, what are you doing? And that was a real eye-opener. It was a great time. I started in 1976. So you could still feel Walt Disney in the air, and certainly all the people that worked there were very close to Walt. It was a little kind of stuck in time. You know, there was a time there when people were considering, like, what would Walt do and what kind of movies would he make. But that changed pretty quickly because Ron Miller, to his credit, knew that he had to start replacing talent in animation, that the old guys were retiring, and rightly so. He also saw that Disney had to compete in live action. So he started the Touchstone Pictures brand and started making films like Splash and really was turning a corner at that time. So it was an exciting time to be at the studio. And also a bunch of kids were coming in the studio like Tim Burton and Joe Ranft and Brad Bird and Glenn Keane that were new and trying to figure out this animation thing.
You might have heard of a few of those people.
They're good.
What a crazy time to be entering, just that career. Like, that's incredible. But let's fast forward a bunch of years, and you end up being a producer on one of the biggest Disney hits of all time, Beauty and the Beast, which I remember seeing as a kid in theaters. Pat, you were not even born or just born or whatever. So your first experience was home video, I assume. First of all, how did you get to that producer level from that guy delivering all of this fantastic art? Like, it seemed like there was a time, because I believe it was the Beauty and the Beast, the directors as well, the original director was replaced, correct? And so it was some 26-year-old guys working with a lot are now directing this movie. And it's just like, how did that even happen?
It was luck and hard work is the answer. In fact, I just finished working with a wonderful group of filmmakers on a Tyrus Wong documentary that just played at Telluride, and he says the same thing. He said, it's not about talent. Tyrus says, I'm not that talented. It's about luck and hard work, and I think that kind of describes everybody, but me especially. I was an animator for a while and did some cleanup work and saw that I wasn't going to be Glenn Keane's pretty early. And I didn't have the patience for it, to be honest.
And did you study that? I know you said you studied music.
I was an art minor.
Okay.
So I've always been a painter. I've always loved drawing Disney characters. But I knew I wasn't going to be great at it, and I didn't have the patience to sit at a drawing board for the amount of time it takes to be good. So I started working in production management, and I was a production manager on Great Mouse Detective, and I had also worked on Pete's Dragon as a PA, just running around. I worked with Don Bluth really closely, and I did everything for him. I paid his bills, I got his dry cleaning, and I learned a lot from him. So when it came time for, there was a new movie being developed called Who Framed Roger Rabbit. I knew a lot about live action animation combination from my Pete's Dragon days. So a new group of executives was in, Peter Schneider, Jeffrey Katzenberg, and they called me into those meetings with Spielberg and Zemeckis. So I was like the go-to guy for animation and live action, and ended up living in London for 2 years, producing the animation on Roger Rabbit, which is that's another hour we can talk about. But at the end of that, Jeffrey Katzenberg said, we want to do Beauty and the Beast. It's been knocking around the studio for a while. Nobody's known quite how to crack it. And we went with we wanted Richard Williams, actually, who did the animation on Roger Rabbit, to direct it. But he didn't want to for a variety of reasons, and suggested Richard Purdom, who's a really, really great director in London. And Richard developed the movie, and I brought over people like Mel Shaw, Glenn Keane, Tom Cito, Andreas Deja, just a few, lightweights. And we worked really around the clock in London for several months developing it. At the same time, Little Mermaid came out. And it changed the world because it's such a beautiful movie.
Changed my world.
Yes, yes. So the filmmakers on that film, Ron and John and Howard Ashman and Alan Menken, really changed everything. And we weren't doing so well on Beauty and the Beast. So Purdom decided to step down and step aside, and we brought the movie back to Los Angeles. And we did what I would call a battlefield promotion. Two of the guys in story, Kirk Wise and Gary Trousdale, both CalArts guys, both kind of brilliant, were in the story department, and it was like, oh, the general's just been killed. Who can hear? Oh, you guys, so step up. So they were made interim directors, which meant you're probably never going to be the director, but direct this movie until we find the real director. And they made it all the way through, and thank God they did, because so much of them is on the screen, all of them. And our story department on that movie, on Beauty and the Beast, was, if you look back, Brenda Chapman was in our story, but Chris Sanders, who did Lilo and Stitch, and some terrific DreamWorks movies like How to Train Your Dragon, was on the story crew. Roger Allers, who later did Lion King, was on the story crew. So it was what would become an all-star group of directors was our story crew. And then we brought in Howard because of Mermaid, and Howard was our godfather. And you have to think Howard wasn't just a lyricist. He was a director, theater director. He understood how to tell stories with music, and he taught me everything I know about musicals, for sure. And it was bittersweet because at the same time he had HIV, and he ended up dying of AIDS during the movie, and sadly didn't even see the finished movie. Also the topic for another hour. Yeah. So great man, truly great man, who taught us a lot, and his fingerprints are all over Beauty and the Beast. When you're making a movie like that, you don't have any expectation for it to be a huge mega hit or a cultural. You just don't. You're just trying to finish it.
Yeah, right, to survive.
Try not to embarrass yourself in front of your friends. And then when it came out and people started to like it and started to notice it and we showed it even unfinished at the New York Film Festival. And talk about flop sweat. We were walking around. I was sitting in a opera box at Lincoln Center at the side of the theater. And so Kirk and Gary and myself and Roy Disney, and they're showing the movie, and it's not done, and then there's 1,000 people down there. And I just thought, I can jump off this balcony, perhaps. And then it finished, and people were applauding, and then they stood up and applauded and kept going. And then the spotlight came over on us in the opera box, and I felt like Eva Peron or something. and I just thought, this is an out-of-body experience. I'm standing next to Roy Disney with my good friends Kirk and Gary, and there's an audience full of celebrities and things applauding. And I just still to this day can't quite add that all up. Yeah. It's very humbling, I think is the word for it. So the movie went on to get a Best Picture nomination, which even Walt Disney didn't get till late in his career. So it's very humbling, is all I can say.
So one thing you kind of skimmed past a little bit with Beauty and the Beast was the fact that it wasn't originally a musical.
No, not at all. It was it's a European fairy tale and a really old tale. It's Cupid Psyche.
It's a tale as old as time.
Tale as old as it's Cupid. Yeah, it's Cupid and Psyche. It's Cyrano. It's Phantom of the Opera. It's Hunchback of Notre Dame. It's a very old story, and so we were telling it in London with Richard Purdom in a very European way, much like the Jean Cocteau film of Beauty and the Beast, which is kind of a classic. And Mermaid is what changed it. It's say no. We can take a story and musicalize it and make it 1,000% better, and it really felt more Disney. You know, that's the thing. We made several non-musicals. Even Black Cauldron was a non-musical, and they're great movies. And
he loves Black Cauldron. He loves it.
We're coming to the El Capitan to show it. And we're doing a panel discussion we talked about the other day, and I'm bringing back a lot of the filmmakers and things to do it there. So are you going to come?
Now I am.
Yeah, we'll be there.
Well, more on that later.
We'll wave.
So anyway, so music, is so closely welded to Disney. The director's offices in the very earliest days of Disney were called music rooms because the director and the musicians shared an office together. It wasn't like you finished the movie and sent it to Hans Zimmer and he did the music. You had them in the movie with you from the beginning, and that's what we did.
Pat, any questions about Beauty and the Beast that you have?
No, but
what was it like following Mermaid, though? I mean, like you said, such a game changer. Were you guys in the middle of Beauty and the Beast and be like, oh no, like, do they expect this from us? And
yeah, it's exactly that. It's exactly that. They were. It's not that they were a hit, which they were. It's not that they were a box office hit, which they totally were. It's the level of storytelling, and there's not an extra frame in that movie. The animation's exquisite. The connection to the characters. It's as close to a perfect movie, I think, as you can get. So there was a real. I think that pushed us on Beauty and the Beast to try to at least attempt to get to that level. Then when we had Howard and Alan, we thought, okay, this is a good step in that direction. But there's a lot of fear, I think, but also a lot of great people. You know, if there's a gift that I have, it's I try really hard to identify and gather a group of people that I think are extraordinary, and then create a safe place for them. And by that I mean as few distractions as can, laugh as much as you can. Keep negative forces away as much as you can. Because when you're a producer, you're like a coach on a basketball team. You know, you're trying to pull a team together. You're not making the shots. You're not passing the ball. But you're trying to get those people to do their best work. And that's what I love about what I do. And if I have a little bit of talent, that's kind of where it rests.
I just want to mention what you just described is such a perfect explanation of what a producer is, which I feel like a lot of people don't understand.
Oh, yeah, it's true. Most people, in fact, say, "Oh, you're the guy that gets the money," and I'm the last guy that gets the money. You know, I'm a drummer. I honestly, I'm a musician and an artist. Mm-hmm. Do I look at budgets? Yes. Do I manage production and things like that? Yes. But I also had amazing associate producers on all these films who were very much like line producers and in the trenches about all that stuff. No, I'm a creative producer, which means I try to be the first one on the movie and put together a great team, find a great writer, story people, and put them in the room early. You know, even on Lion King, which was an unusual film, Hans Zimmer and Elton John, they were there on the first day. It's not like, well, let's write some songs later and we'll bring them in. It's get them in the room and let's work with them and try to do something different.
Yeah, you mentioned Lion King, which is a very nice segue. But before we go there, I just want to ask real quickly, selfishly. So you worked on Roger Rabbit. Mm-hmm. What's the real story as to why there's no sequel? We know the want and desire was there, but what really happened there?
I really can't comment, but here's the story.
Okay.
There have been several sequels written over the years, and a desire to do several sequels over the years. So about 10 years after the movie, there was almost one that got made. There's some great scripts floating around even now that Bob Zemeckis likes a lot and the studio likes. It's just a very complicated movie to put together from a business standpoint. If you remember the film, it's a curtain call of all the animated characters of the world. So any script that's going to do justice to Roger Rabbit has to include not only Roger and Jessica and Baby Herman, but it's also about the Warner Brothers characters and the Looney Tunes characters and the Disney characters. And so, and it's a co-venture between Amblin and Disney. So there's a lot of business elements to pull together. And that's one of many reasons, but it makes it very complicated and to an extent very expensive to pull all those things together, particularly since the first one was a hit. You have to remember in 1988 when that movie came out, animation was like Mermaid hadn't come out, Oliver and Company hadn't come out. So it was like, yeah, you want our characters, you want Foghorn Leghorn, sure, we're not doing anything with them. You want Bugs Bunny, sure. It was not a big deal.
Yeah.
Now animation is, front and center in the most lucrative part of the film industry. So it's just different times.
So you mentioned after Beauty and the Beast, you went on to produce a little small indie pictures called Lion King and Hunchback. What was it like following then Beauty and the Beast, who then was nominated and won for Best Picture?
One Golden Globe.
Yeah.
Yeah, we did extraordinarily. Got a Golden Globe.
Which you accepted. You got to go up
I did.
and
I did.
say, hey.
I did. It was really weird.
You went, hey.
I was sitting at the back of the auditorium at the Beverly Hilton because that's where kind of back where the busboys were, because that's where the animators sat. It's like we're down front. You're going to have
the celebrity
Arnold and rightly so. Nobody wants to see me, so I had a long walk to the stage, and it was pretty funny. But yeah, Lion King was interesting because after Beauty and the Beast, and there's another great movie in there. Rescuers Down Under, which is never talked about, and it really should be because it's the first digital movie in Hollywood, and paved the way. There wouldn't be a Lion King or Beauty without that movie, and it's a good movie. But Lion King was a idea to do Bambi in Africa. That was all it was. We would sit around and Jeffrey Katzenberg and Peter Schneider, they would just say, oh, let's do this Bambi in Africa thing. Coming of age story. Great. Coming of age story. It's called King of the Jungle. And had a couple writers come in and write. Linda Wolverton, who did Beauty and the Beast, wrote for a while. It was developed with George Scribner, who did Oliver and Company. Terrific guy. And he ultimately didn't see quite eye to eye with the direction that the studio and Jeffrey wanted to go in. So there was, they got along fine as human beings, but there was just a disagreement in terms of the kind of film that would happen. So George stepped away from the movie, as is pretty common in animation, and any more so than live action. Because I think people say, if I'm going to spend 4 years of my life on something, I better love it. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times people say, I thought I loved this, but now I'm not quite sure. So, that was another thing where it was a little bit of a battlefield promotion. Roger Allers, who was a story guy at the time, and Rob Minkoff, who was a brilliant animator story guy, were paired together. And so we were developing King of the Jungle. And we had a day, 2 days actually, where we locked ourselves in a room with pizza and beer. We literally closed the door and turned out the lights. And so we're not leaving until we figure out the story. And that pretty much what came out of that room on legal pads was what the movie was. And so we rewrote the whole thing. And that's where it became kind of this, it's really kind of the story of Joseph from the Bible, where you grow up as a royal and are pushed out of your kingdom and grow up in the wilderness and then come back and reveal yourself to be this character again. There's a little bit of Moses thrown in here and there, a little bit of Hamlet, which is something that wasn't terribly intentional. It just later on, once we started to introduce Mufasa's ghost, it became I think it was Michael Eisner that said, "Oh, you're doing Hamlet." So that became kind of the story.
You're like, no, we're doing something original, 100%.
Yeah, but it was hard. It was very much a dusty kind of National Geographic film for a long, long time, and hard to get people to work on. Yeah, very hard.
Because I think it was Jeffrey Katzenberg who was saying, "Oh, Pocahontas, next big hit. Lion King, a little movie we're doing."
Exactly. Yeah, it was a B movie. It was meant to be a experiment, just kind of a B movie, lower budget, like Dumbo or something like that. And to me, when you say like Dumbo, I go, "Oh, good."
Yeah,
I love Dumbo. And it's funny. It's not the money you spend. It's never the money you spend. Some of the toughest times, like Beauty and the Beast, Roger Rabbit, we did with really low budgets. It's about the idea. So on Lion King, the idea grew, and there was a sequence that Chris Sanders did of Mufasa's ghost, and he put it, he storyboarded it with some music from The Mission, Morricone's score, and showed it to us all, and that was a game changer. Because now all of a sudden this National Geographic piece had a sense of spirituality to it, it had a sense of fathers and sons to it, and it had some magic to it. And so that whole idea of him seeing his father's image in the pond, and then dad shows up in the clouds and all that stuff, just turned the movie on its head. And changed everything. And then the other so many accidents that happen on these movies. We were in London recording, and we were walking down the street, and Roger saw this kind of guy who was dancing to a harmonica, and kind of a bag lady looking guy, really unwashed street person, but really entertaining. And he said, that's what Rafiki should be. Just kind of this kooky guy.
That's awesome. What a great story.
Kind of kooky and not sure whether you should approach him or not. Is he going to steal your wallet or whatever? But he's full of wisdom. Yeah. The wisdom of the streets. And Rafiki, who was in the movie a very hallowed, wise old shaman who said, "Mufasa, my good friend, it's so good to see," became this kind of hooty little guy because of that dear man on the streets of London.
Had it been cast voice yet?
Yeah, it had. Robert Guillaume. So we pitched it to Robert Guillaume, and we said, "Robert, it's this shaman. It's a wise old man character." And he said, "Great." So the first recording session was Mufasa, very wise, very gathered together. And the next session we said, we've had some changes, but we think you're still right for the thing. Can you be kooky? Can you be wacky? Can you be more Ed Wynn? And just, be this street person. And he was, and it worked out well.
That's fantastic. I remember recently, obviously I saw this in theaters as a kid as well, but a few years back, they re-released it in 3D in the theaters, and I went and saw it, and it had probably been a while since I saw The Lion King beginning to end,
Yeah.
And I literally sat there in the theater just going, oh my God, this movie's incredible. You kind of forget because they're all so good. Mm-hmm. You forget until you're sitting there watching it. You're like, wow, this movie is... now I understand. I remember why this was one of the biggest hits of all time.
But again, you have to point to the people. It's you always think, Disney is this kind of guarded thing. It's really not. It's a group of guys and girls trying to do their best. And that movie, I think of Chris Sanders. I think of Rob Minkoff, who went on to do Stuart Little and other films. Roger Allers and Brenda Chapman, who's probably one of the greatest story people and directors ever on the planet, were all on that movie and contributed so much to that movie. And then the music, of course. Elton's songs were extremely good melodically, and then what Hans brought to it just took it over the top. So you're lucky. You put people in the room together and you hope you get a good chemical reaction, and that was one of those that happened. We didn't know it up until it came out, but it worked really well.
And of course, while we're speaking of Beauty and the Beast and Lion King, not only were like amazing movies, but then turned out to amazing Broadway performances as well. You'd never think it would make that jump either. We
used to joke about it. When we were making, we thought, it'd be really funny. This is going to be an ice show or something, and they're like, it'll go on Broadway, and there's these rubberhead lions running around. And that was another masterstroke. Tom Schumacher, who
I love Tom Schumacher. Well,
the thing about Tom is he runs theatrical for Walt Disney, but he's the guy that brought Julie Taymor to Los Angeles for the Olympic Arts Festival back in 1984. And he's so interested in theater, not only legit big commercial box office theater, but experimental theater and all kinds. And Tom was the one that said, let's get Julie Taymor because she'll do something that none of us will think of. It's not going to be a little theme park show, with all respect to the theme park shows, because they're pretty awesome too. But let's do something that's just off the charts. And then Julie comes out and you see, people like a panther walk on the stage, but you also see the guy that's puppeting him. And she pulls like a Japanese bunraku puppeting along with Balinese shadow puppets and folds them into this piece. And you're just going, well, where did she come from?
Yeah.
And so much credit goes to Tom and to Julie for the success of that show.
Yeah, I'm not gonna lie. First of all, I'm a huge musical theater lover, and I loved Beauty and the Beast when I saw that. And I remember hearing about the announcement of The Lion King going to Broadway, and I literally thought they lost their minds.
Yeah.
I was like, "There's no way that can work." And it actually was my first Broadway musical ever. I'd seen a lot in Boston, but the first show on Broadway I saw was The Lion King in the New Amsterdam Theater. And it's literally one of those shows, first minute, you are crying. Just that opening sequence of Circle of Life is mind-blowing.
It's one of those convergences of great theater, great theatricality, great music. So much of the success of this film is Elton John and Tim Rice and Hans and Mark Mancina, who did so many of the songs and arrangements, and Lebo, who did so much of the performances of the music and African music in this. But so much of it's chance. Michael Eisner really wanted to do it as a Broadway thing, and we thought, that's ridiculous. And then Tom said, it might work with Julie. And then there was an album recorded called Rhythm of the Pride Lands that Chris Montan put together with Lebo, and that was kind of the sequel album with a lot of songs and musical material. It had nothing to do with the stage show, but all of those songs from Rhythm of the Pride Lands ended up being in the stage show. And so you had these things that were just luck. This album's here. Well, we're going to do a stage show. Let's listen to the album. Hey, that's pretty good. So you have this, that's what life is. The creative process at Disney is so chaotic and so out of control and kind of a tumbling series of failures and fortunes. And it's almost amusing if people think, oh, wow, you guys, it's just, you must be so talented. Well, yeah, there's a lot of great people that can draw on things, but you just it's whitewater rafting. You have to be prepared. You have to have your skill set. You have to have the best people you can, but then you have to keep your eyes open because you're going to hit rocks and you're going to fall out of the boat. So it's a thrill ride.
We could go on forever, so I'm going to fast forward here because
we can go on. I'm ready.
If you're serious, I will keep talking.
Just keep going.
Okay, fine. Then let's talk more about Disney Theatrical because I'm so obsessed with Disney Theatrical. The first one was Beauty and the Beast that came before Lion King. There was, I think, like the theme parks, the Broadway environment wasn't going to buy it. Like this company can't come in and make a Broadway musical.
Well, and this comes out in the PBS documentary about Walt Disney. There's plenty of people on the planet who think, possibly rightly so, that Walt Disney's lowbrow, or at the best, middlebrow. It's not high art. It's not Picasso. It's not Matisse.
Lion King disproves all of that.
I think it does. I'm too close to it. And
I'm telling you, I'm not close to it. It disproves all of it. As a theater geek myself, it is art on stage.
Yeah.
And Hunchback of Notre Dame on stage, which please tell me you saw.
Of course I have. It's brilliant. It's brilliant.
Brilliant.
Hunchback's, the score of Hunchback and the music behind Hunchback, Stephen Schwartz and Alan Menken, is, I think, some of Alan's best work.
I would agree.
It is a very mature, interesting, relevant story to tell. And when you see that on stage, talk about emotional. It's great.
We were lucky enough to see it in San Diego, and I'm so happy I didn't wait for it to go to Broadway because I'm heartbroken over the fact that it's not. It's
maybe someday it will.
I really hope they figure out how to do it. But literally one of the greatest theatrical experiences of my life was that production of Hunchback. And I just remember sitting with a grin on my face the whole time thinking to myself, if these actors are looking at me because I was in the front row, they're going to think I'm an idiot. Because I was so invested in that show. It was absolutely beautiful.
That's a great piece of theater, and
as well as the movie. I love the movie.
Yeah. Well, again, to Tom's credit, on the stage, you're able to take some risks and do some things that maybe you couldn't do in the movie. Because in the movie, we're always aware of our audience. We have a family audience. We feel very loyal to that audience. So we have to walk a line of being appropriate for that audience, but also not pulling our punches. We don't want to edit ourselves to the point where you look at a film like Hunchback and go, oh, there's nothing at all like Victor Hugo. They might as well retitle it something else. So you just have to be true to yourself and your audience, but also be true to the material. And Hunchback was one of those cases.
So the three of the films you worked on, Beauty and the Beast, Lion King, and Hunchback, all became hits on the stage. Were you? How involved were you? Was there any involvement?
I honestly,
or did you go to opening night?
I honestly was not involved that much. I feel strongly that I worked on the movie and am fortunate of that. But if you're going to do it in another venue, it's time for somebody else to take a crack at it. Because you can get tired on it. So the most I get involved on those things, like on Lion King, is when it was in tryouts in Minneapolis, I went and saw some of the tryouts, gave notes, that kind of thing. And I'm always happy to do that. But no, it's really in the hands of the theater guys. And much like Beauty and the Beast, the live action film we're doing now, I'm an executive producer on it.
Oh, don't even get me going on that movie. It looks incredible.
Look at the time. Oh, but I'm a producer on it, but I'm also really aware that Bill Condon, the director, is kind of a genius when it comes to musical theater on film. And he doesn't need Don Hahn sitting around every day. And he has cast people in this film that are extraordinary, that love Emma Watson loves this material, grew up with it. And then you have people like Kevin Kline and Emma Thompson. And so that's another case where I had my chance. I'm really proud of the Beauty and the Beast I made. Now I want to see somebody else reinvent it, and that's like a joy for me. It's great.
Well, since you brought that up, what is the differences between working on, because I know you've done animation, then of course you did the live action Haunted Mansion, and like, what is the difference between doing like live action versus animation?
At its core, it's all about story. So that part of it's the same. You're sitting around trying to come up with a story that's interesting and engaging. The production process is crazy, because in live action you have your actors for a limited amount of time, and it's expensive on a daily basis.
It's true. I never thought about that.
Yeah, so
that's interesting.
like on Maleficent, we had Angelina Jolie for 3 months, and so you have to schedule it. And we have brilliant people in London doing this. Schedule it so you take advantage of that, and every day that she's there, you get the shots you need. And then when she leaves, you might be able to pick up some other shots, but you've done your business. And in animation, the sets are always standing. In animation, the actors are always there in their trailers; they're ready to go. And it's one of the reasons animation is so good so much of the time is you have a chance to reshoot and a chance to bring people back and do fixes all the time. And that iterative process in animation makes those films better.
You mentioned Maleficent, and what are your thoughts on this whole animation to live action trend that seems to be going on? And are there any that you would love to see be made that haven't been announced yet?
Yeah, it's a natural progression because, honestly speaking, all those movies came from live action too. There were 7 versions of Snow White in live action before the animated version. The same with Sleeping Beauty, the same with Hunchback. So it's, animation is not a genre, it's a technique. It happens to be done with pixels or a pencil.
Write that down. Animation is not a genre, it's a technique. Write it down.
Yeah. And ironically, most live action movies are becoming more animated. So there's really not that big of a difference between the two. It's really natural for these to migrate to live action, especially at Disney. Disney's associated with a lot of these movies. It makes business sense to reinvent them. I can't wait to see what Jon Favreau does with Jungle Book.
That's beautiful.
it's going to be interesting, and you want to see the reinvention, because as much as I appreciate and love the original Jungle Book like crazy, man, I love that movie. I also feel like it's our job as filmmakers to retell those stories. And that's what storytelling is. It started around the campfire, and the Greeks told it, in their Aristotle and Plato kind of classes, or in the Greek theater or whatever. Every generation has their storytellers, and ours is the beneficiary of having film as our storytelling medium. So it's not just a business decision. It's kind of a social responsibility almost to retell these stories. And you may like one or not like another. There's probably 11 versions of Hunchback of Notre Dame out there that, with Lon Chaney and that kind of thing. All have their good parts and bad parts, but they are tales as old as time, and they have to be retold, and that's why we gravitate towards them again and again.
That's one thing I love about Disney is like when you think of like all these tales, they're not, Disney didn't make them. They're all stories adapted by Disney. But when you think Hunchback of Notre Dame, first thing comes to mind is the Disney movie.
Yeah.
And it seems like Disney loves making that iconic thing, especially with Gigantic coming out with Jack and the Beanstalk, is they want to think, when you think Jack and the Beanstalk, they want you to think Disney. So now when I think Hunchback of Notre Dame, I think Disney, I don't think Victor Hugo.
I think Hellfire. That's what I think.
Wow, yeah. You could use some therapy. Yeah, it's true. I mean, they're great stories, and again, they're great business decisions because they're well known in the culture. There's a thing called kind of collective mental real estate that it means it's just in our culture. If I were to say the word lightsaber to you, or pretty much anybody around the world, you kind of know what a lightsaber is. That wasn't the case 30 years ago. But that's in our vernacular right now. Or if I were to say Kardashian, you know what that is, and you have a reaction to it because it's in our head, sadly. And that's what storytelling thrives on, is taking things that are in our head. The notion of pirates, that's in our head, but then pushing it to the next level and say, well, yeah, pirates is in our head, but Jack Sparrow is a different pirate, and being able to invent something around the pirate theme is great. So that's, as a storyteller, as a producer, that's the kind of thing you're looking for.
I could not let you leave here without discussing your masterpiece.
Yeah.
Waking Sleeping Beauty.
Oh, thank you. That means a lot.
Director, producer, narrator.
Yeah.
If you have not seen this documentary, Waking Sleeping Beauty is about the animation renaissance that went on between 1984 to 1994 at the Walt Disney Animation Studios. It came out, I'm so happy, it came out the same year as The Boys, the Sherman Brothers documentary. And I saw The Boys, and they showed a trailer for Waking Sleeping Beauty. And I said, I am keeping track of this thing. And as soon as I can see it, I will. And I got to go to the theater and see it. And of course, on the DVD and everything. It's truly a masterpiece. And I'm just curious. It seemed like a passion project for you. I'm assuming it was your idea?
Yeah, me and Peter Schneider. So Peter was the head of animation during this time. And a great guy, probably one of the smartest guys you'll ever meet. Doesn't suffer fools. Difficult sometimes, but really big-hearted and really loved animation and theater. The theater division was formed by Peter and Tom. So we went out to breakfast at the beautiful Hill Street Cafe in La Cañada, California, with Dick Cook, who was the head of the studio at the time, also a great guy. Dick grew up operating the steam train at Disneyland, a real Disney guy. And at the time, he put some money aside to make 3 films. And one was The Boys, about the Sherman Brothers. One was Walt and El Grupo, about Walt's trip to South America. And one became Waking Sleeping Beauty. We had breakfast with Dick, and I just said, this is never going to happen, but let's go out. And we said, we'd like to make a clear-eyed, journalistic, warts and all picture, before we all get too old to remember, about this period we lived through. And we were there at the table, and we feel like if we don't make it, the story's going to get lost. Because not unlike the Walt Disney documentary on PBS this Monday and Tuesday, we get old, we forget, or the stories become apocryphal, where you're just repeating somebody else's version of the story, and it becomes less and less true.
Yeah.
So the timing was good, and boy, that project, it started up being called Persistence of Vision, which is kind of a nice double entendre, because it's the physical physiology of your eye that takes 24 frames a second and bakes those into what is perceived as movement. But it's also what it takes to make an animated film, this persistence of vision. Eventually Peter actually came up with the title of Waking Sleeping Beauty because it was something that came up in one of the interviews and one of the newspaper articles from the time. So to our surprise, Dick said, yeah. And we said, we're going to do it warts and all. We're going to do it like a jury trial where we present the facts, trying to be as objective as possible, and use the audience can come to whatever conclusion you want. And he said, go ahead. And we presented a budget and we started making it. And we were actually looking for a director early on, and we came to the conclusion that I should direct it because every director we interviewed, I ended up like jumping down their throat and saying, no, it should be this way. No, you have to talk to this guy. So, and I lived it. I was at those tables, thankfully. I'm the luckiest guy on the planet. So I sat there. I was in a room with Woolley Reitherman and Frank and Ollie. When I was an assistant director, I worked with Woolley for a couple of years. So I was fortunate. And I just went on an interview frenzy. We interviewed as many people as we could that were there and got their points of view. And then baked those into the movie. And one of the main decisions I did early on was to say, I want to do this with all archival footage. Yeah. And the reason I did that is I wanted you to sit at the table with me. And if we did modern talking head interviews, it would turn into old guys reminiscing, kind of like this today. And I didn't want that. I wanted you to feel like, oh, I'm there, and there's Howard, and there's Alan, and there's Peter, and to be able to feel like you're actually there. So that's why I took that approach.
One of the questions I had about that was, so you do use the old documentary footage, and there's stuff with Michael Eisner and Jeffrey Katzenberg and stuff, but were there also new interviews included with that? Or like, do you need permission from them to use that old archival footage, or is that the studio's footage? So if you have permission from the Walt Disney Studios?
It was a little bit of both. I took a don't ask, don't tell kind of thing, which is finding the footage, which was a challenge. You wouldn't think so, but to find a 3/4-inch videotape of interviews on Little Mermaid, for example, was difficult. And sometimes it was in somebody's garage. Some of the clips in the movie were from my mom, who taped things off of television. So it was a very, much like our digital age, things are getting lost because it's not a hard copy. I can show you a brilliant photograph of Walt Disney standing in front of his Hyperion studio like it happened yesterday because it's on film. I'd be hard-pressed to find a good document from Beauty and the Beast that hasn't been 5 softwares ago that I can't pull up on my computer. So it's a good lesson. And in fact, I've showed this movie at Pixar and Lucasfilm and different places, and I keep saying, walk around with a camera, shoot your history, because nobody else is going to. Yeah.
So you've done countless things, and one of our favorite things, obviously, is going into the parks and seeing what Walt Disney had to offer. But what is it like seeing what you brought to life in the parks?
It's a hoot. It's unbelievable. After I saw you at the beautiful AMC theaters at Downtown Disney, I went into the parks and had my hot dog, and I watched the late parade, which is amazing.
Paint the night, folks.
Paint the night. There's some lights and things I can't describe. It's great. And so all these floats are going by, and then this big Beauty and the Beast thing goes by. I just go, oh. And it doesn't become, it's not yours anymore. It is mine. I know the stories. I know the movie. I have such, respect for those times. But you feel like somebody else has taken this and loved it into existence and made this float in this moment, or a Lion King float, or a Lion King attraction, or whatever. Florida, the Beauty and the Beast restaurant, that kind of stuff. And you just go, good on them. It's so great. I don't know how to build a restaurant. Yeah. And somebody was inspired enough by the film to turn that into an experience for the guests. So it's like a child. You give birth. It's really painful. There's a lot of joy and thrill, and there's a lot of pain and disappointment. And some of those children are born and very fortunate and grow up, and then you send them off into the world. That's exactly what it is. Creating anything, a painting, a show like this, a movie, is exactly the same. You're creating this little thing and you send it out there, and you don't know what's going to happen to it. You don't know who's going to see this. You don't know who's, this may inspire or dissuade some young person out there that's watching this going, I never want to do that. And the same is true with all these movies. And so when Beauty goes out there, or any of these films, and is appreciated, and other people can turn it into things, it's an honor, it's a thrill, and it's wacky. And the only thing I want to do is, like, when I was eating my hot dog, and I just want to stand up and go, hey, everybody, I did that movie. Yeah. And all these people are sitting around, they're looking at the movie and goes, hey, hi, you don't know me. My name's Don Hahn, and I worked with Kirk Wise and Gary Trousdale. and a bunch of creative people, and we made Beauty and the Beast. And that's see that dress that Belle's wearing? Well, there's a guy named Brian McAtee who is our art director on that film, and he designed that dress late one night. We were having a beer, and he said, "How about a yellow dress?" And we said, "Yeah." Well, how about this? Well, why don't you take it off the shoulders? Well, Brian, that's a good idea. So we took it off the shoulders, and we thought, well, why don't we put Beast in blue? Because then you have a yellow and blue. It's kind of a Boy Scout thing. It's like a blue and yellow ball, and that'll be it. And so we left that night, and it was done. And now it's a parade float, you know?
And they're like, do you know where the bathroom is?
You just take me with you, and I'll point you out to everybody.
No, I don't know.
Created the Beast.
No, I didn't. I don't want to be pointed out, but it's an amusing thing. So enjoy it.
You've been talking a lot today about the creative process in general, so I want to mention, because I love this book. You've written quite a few books.
Oh, yay. Thank you.
Brainstorm. Unleashing Your Creative Self. Okay, I'm just going to show you. This thing is full of underlining and notes in here.
Oh, yay.
I want you to read an excerpt if you wouldn't mind.
Okay.
Because oh, God, I love this chunk right there.
Ladies and gentlemen.
By Don Hahn.
We lead lives of response. Response to emergencies, deadlines, doorbells, and text messages. As a result of this deadening drone of responsibility, we are left with little or no time for the dreamer. Creativity demands big, protected chunks of time set aside just to dream, and big, protected places like studios, labs, and libraries set aside just to dream in. Cultivating the dreamer is not just a once-in-a-while thing, but rather a constant, regular, habitual practice of dreaming for the rest of our lives.
Yay.
Insert applause here.
Yeah, the reason I wanted I'm the type of person that feels guilty taking that time for myself.
Yeah, we all do.
And it's when this is permission to me. When I read this from somebody who's does it for real.
Man, it's important, and it's scientific. You know, the thing is, our subconscious brain science is such a new thing. Our subconscious brain is trying to react to all this stuff and add it up. And if you don't give it time, Walt Stanchfield, our mentor and teacher at Disney, used to say, impression without expression equals depression. So if you get all these impressions and don't give yourself time to express yourself and express those into just thoughts and things, it's a bad road. So that time alone to just think is work. And that took me a long time to figure out. I would feel guilty too. You feel like I'm going to go on vacation and I really should be, drawing, or I really should be doing. Work is not doing. Work is also being. So you have to be able to do and make and draw and computer and all that stuff. But it's equally as important to sit on a rock for a day. Who takes this time? I've never done it really. To take a whole day and just do nothing. Bill Gates famously would take a week every year and go sit in a mountain cabin alone in his underwear and just think and just think and let it come to light. Walt Disney was great at this. He knew sometimes early in his career he got really burned out and had what they call at the time a nervous breakdown. And this is he talks about this in the documentary on PBS this Monday and Tuesday. And if we don't give ourselves that time, we can really crash ourselves. And it's personal time. We love our families. We love our spouses. We love our kids. We love our friends. They are all important. But the most important person you have is you. And that's often the first person we deny and push aside. Yeah.
Guys, get this book. Seriously, so
Thanks.
good. You've also got the Drawn to Life book series, and Before Ever After is coming out, which is I got a little thing here I can show. Before Ever After, the Lost Lectures of Walt Disney's Animation Studios, comes out pretty soon.
It does. Comes out really soon. It was a cool project. It took a long time to pull together, but I was always aware of these lectures at Disney in preparation for Snow White. This is something we talked about earlier. When Walt made Snow White, he realized he had to raise the level of his artists, so he would drive them to Chouinard Art Institute in Los Angeles, which was a world-class art institute. And eventually, he hired a lot of those teachers to come into his studio and teach and recruit. And he sent guys to New York to recruit animators and artists. And nobody knew animation because there wasn't a feature animation industry. So he had to not only invent the industry, but teach the people how to be better artists. And they brought all these people in, and they were carefully transcribed lectures. And they were lectures on color, like Faber Buren, the famous colorist from Yale University, came out and talked about color theory and the psychology of color. People talked about the physiology of hearing and how sound affects the emotions. People talked about architecture and dance and acting and comedy. And then internally, people like Art Babbitt, who developed Goofy, would talk about who is Goofy. Freddie Moore would talk about who's Mickey? How do you draw him? But who is he as a character? So it's all these lectures carefully transcribed and on the shelf that have never been published. So Tracy Miller-Zarnicki, my co-author, and I tried to put that together into a book that has context for those lectures, and then literally printed those lectures, including printed them on the page the way they appear in the archives. And we found them all. The archives didn't have them all. The Animation Research Library didn't have them all. So we actually went in some cases to auction houses where we saw, oh, the lecture once existed at this auction house on this date. Who bought it? Oh, can we have their phone number? And we would call them and say, hi, I know you bought this. Can we actually borrow this and scan it and give it back to you? So we did as much detective work as we could to pull this book together. And it's another book, it's another educational book, not only for animators, but fans of animation and also historians, just to say, how did early Hollywood form itself? And who invented animation at Walt Disney Studios? And what a genius Walt was in terms of his love of education.
My goodness. Lots of books by Don Hahn. I just want to say go to donhahn.com, DONHAHN.com. That's where everything is, right?
Yeah. I put a lot of information up there because I have a love of, sharing all this. A lot of people shared it with me when I was coming up. And I was lucky enough to work with Wooly and Don Bluth and those guys. They were liberal with sharing their art, and I want to be as liberal as sharing what I do. So you can find it on my website and around the web. And it's important. That's why I work with PBS on this documentary. That's why I write these books, because it's a great art form, making movies and telling stories, and it's fun to share it.
So, Don, thank you so much. That was a wealth of information. If you don't mind, we love our listeners and viewers, and we love to give them little prizes. So I got some prints here from Beauty and the Beast and Lion King and the documentary as well. Would you mind signing these on camera so people can't say that I just did it myself?
I would be happy to.
Excellent. And while we're doing that, we like to end each of our shows with a bit of trivia.
Yeah.
And so we ask each other the trivia, but we'll start with you.
Yes.
And Pat, you want to go first?
Sure. I recently found out that after opening Disneyland in 1955, Walt was planning on opening another park, but it fell through.
Really?
I actually might know this, but I'm gonna let Don go first.
Another park in 55 that fell through. I don't know.
It was after
just
Disneyland.
later?
He was going to open another park. It wasn't necessarily a theme park.
Was it a ski resort?
It was.
Was it a Mineral King?
Yes.
Yes.
Well, you didn't say that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, Mineral King. It was really popular. In fact, there's a great press junket with Governor Brown of California on film with the two of them talking about this great ski resort, but it didn't get built.
It's where Country Bear Jamboree was supposed to go, wasn't it? I think that's what it was being created.
Yeah, can you imagine a Disney-themed ski resort?
Yeah. Awesome.
Oh my God, we have to do that. Actually, let's start spreading that rumor.
That's good. Hey, you heard it here first.
I can't wait for Disney's new themed ski resort in Colorado.
Yeah, I actually recently just found out about.
Oh, you didn't know about that? Yeah, there's great. I'm trying to think. It might have been The Man Behind the Myth where they showed the footage of the news reel you were talking about. But he passed away, cool. And that's why it didn't happen, I believe. Yeah. Yeah,
and there were also Sierra Club concerns about the impact on this particular site, and in retrospect, they were right. It's a very fragile part of the mountains, and it's an impact to put a ski resort in. Disney would have done it in a incredibly responsible way because they always have and always will, but still it didn't quite come together for whatever reason.
Very good. Hey, very nice.
But it will at some day in the future.
That's right.
At the new Ski Disney resorts in Colorado.
And so my trivia question is about, it's well known that Walt has the most individual Oscars of all time. Nobody's even close to him, I don't believe.
Yeah, it's true.
Do you know what the first one was that he won for?
For Mickey Mouse in 1935.
Nope, it's before that. But
for Flowers and Trees?
Yes.
The first color cartoon.
Yep. Best short subject cartoon, 1932, at the 5th Oscar ceremony. He went, look, this guy knows his Disney thing. So,
you're welcome.
He won his first Oscar. He was actually up against himself for...
I hate when that happens.
It beat Mickey's Orphans, which was another short. And he beat himself. And then, as you mentioned, he got an honorary Oscar years later for the creation of Mickey.
This guy was an Oscar magnet. But ironically, he never got the acknowledgement as a feature feature filmmaker.
Yeah.
He
Mary
was always
Poppins
like,
was the closest,
Mary
right?
Poppins was the closest, and he didn't win it.
Yeah.
He got nominated. Beauty and the Beast was the first animated film to ever win it, and that's ridiculous when you think Beauty and the Beast 1991.
Yeah.
I mean, it's flattering. You go, thank you, but but Pinocchio and
There's so many like that. Like Hitchcock never got an Oscar, right? There's so many of
and
these.
yeah, so
iconic
I'm an
films.
Academy member, and I love the institution. And they talk about education. They're doing some great educational things.
Can't wait for the museum.
The museum is going to be breathtakingly unbelievable. But it's also Hollywood, so Hollywood is about image and it's high school with money.
Yeah. So you survived our trivia. Yay.
Did I do okay? Is there more? That was it?
That's
That was
it.
it.
Just one each. So you don't feel like you've been here long enough?
No, I'm spent. I'm totally spent.
We've taken up so much of your time. Seriously, thank you so much.
You're welcome. It's
for
a
so many
pleasure.
levels, for coming over to do this, for
It's a pleasure.
being a huge part of my childhood. Incredible stuff.
It's great. You guys
So-
do great work, and you are able to share a lot of this stuff with people who may not know it or just becoming interested in Disney. And it's a cool subject. There's a lot of things out in the world you can study and get involved in, and Disney's not the worst one. It's full of inspiration and quality and great people. So it's really proud to be here with you guys.
So, in a nutshell, check out American Experience Walt Disney. Check out donhan.com. I highly suggest the book Brainstorm. I highly suggest the documentary Waking Sleeping Beauty. That's it. Check out our DisneyCoastToCoast.com to find out how you could win those autographed
Come see the Black Cauldron at the El Capitan
Yes.
Theater.
Yeah.
And also, like September 21st, we're doing The Emperor's New Groove. At the,
And Hocus Pocus is going there soon.
Come on, the El Capitan Theater.
I love the El Cap.
We're signing off now, but the El Capitan Theater, if you live outside of Los Angeles, again, get on a plane, go to San Francisco, see the Walt Disney Family Museum, and then come down and visit the El Capitan Theater and see us there for some of these great retrospectives.
And take the tour. They offer tours there as well.
Really?
Yeah, it's we'll talk off camera. It's crazy, but yes, I've taken a backstage tour of the El Cap, and it's available to everybody every day.
It's the theater where Citizen Kane was premiered.
Yeah, it's what an amazing history. It started as the El Capitan, and then Paramount bought it. It became the Paramount Theater. And the crazy thing is Paramount didn't like that beautiful architecture, so they covered it all up to make it all modern, which you can see photos of on the second floor of the El Cap. It's
crazy.
And then Disney came in and took all that modern stuff down
and put in the
fixed it.
mighty Wurlitzer organ.
Yeah, which is fantastic.
Yeah.
So anyway, we can go on forever. Guys, thank you so much for tuning in this week. We will see you next time. Have a fabulous week. Bye.
Hi, guys.
Thanks for listening to Disney Coast to Coast. Have a magical day.
This is going to be the ultimate documentary on Walt. It's 4 hours long.
It is. It is. I mean, there's been a lot of work done on Walt Disney and some spectacular films and documentaries. I think what's interesting about this is enough time has passed. We're nearly 50 years past his life now. And the very first meeting that Sarah Colt, the director of this film, took was with Diane Disney Miller up at the Walt Disney Family Museum. So she had an appreciation. What's interesting, I think what's really good is she's a Disney fan in the way that the world is a Disney fan, but she's not a fan in the way that maybe the three of us are fans.